My background before what I'm doing now was making video games now for about 20 years. Worked at Electronic Arts briefly as a technical game designer for Boomblocks and Medal of Honor Airborne. Early hire with a startup that later became PopCap San Francisco, doing game design stuff there. Then some indie iPhone games back in 08, 09, 2010. Topple was a top seller. Feel For It was an IndieCade finalist. That's part of what connected me to IndieCade going on. And then sort of off and on throughout that, I always, so like those were the professional projects, but there's also recreational projects. I was just doing my own side stuff. And I always I liked those as an outlet because I could fit in way more of those. They're smaller, the lower pressure. And in the process, I started some different clubs. And so 3 different clubs now, the clubs being Game Creation Society, and all 3 of these are still running. We've got GameDev, and this was 2004, this is 2010, and the current one is named after it, GameDev Club. That was just last year.
Where are these based?
So 2015. This is Pittsburgh. It's at Carnegie Mellon. It's with a school, Pittsburgh, or something like that. This is in Georgia Tech or Atlanta. And this is technically, it started in Los Angeles, still based in Los Angeles because that's where I'm from, but is online worldwide. We have a member in Paris, we have a member in a couple in the UK, Netherlands, South America, New Zealand, and scattered throughout the US and Canada and so on. So this has become online, but it started in Los Angeles. And part of what I want to talk about is kind of the format for these organizations, how they work, because they've now produced over 200 games. They've been doing this, every game is a 1 to 5 month schedule, so it's very different in scope and time frame and pressure than a game jam. And also as part of it fits in adult lives a lot easier, because one of the challenges of game jams is like if you're a college age student, it's really easy to kind of like just set aside 48 hours of ignoring your life and obligations. But as a grown up, like it actually matters that I can fit in around having a job and other work and other obligations, and this format works much better for it. And so actually, I think that's going to be quite a useful way to start, but it's distinguishing what it has in common or different with some other things. One reason I explain these as meetups is because they are, fundamentally, it's a group of people who are developers who get together. We'll contrast them between meetups, jams being one of the other obvious targets, school labs, or school studio labs. I might just sort of distinguish that as being increasingly how kind of games programs work. And meetups, jams, school studio labs. Another I was going to. Oh, and then artist collectives, because it's also sort of a related thing. And any one of these could be kind of adapted or morphed into this or borrow from it, whatever. The main difference is, right, so meetups tend to be people from outside companies, outside studios. They all have their own projects. They come together once a month, whatever frequency, a few times a year, and they talk about their outside projects together. And it's great for people who are further experienced, people who already have their own stuff. The difficulties here are twofold. One, it's really inaccessible to beginners. A lot of people who go to these are like, they've never done games, they'd like to get into it, and it's really hard to edge into those teams of people who they already are invested in deep and have a longer plan and whatever. The other thing is they're not all on the same page. They're using different technology, they're using different approaches, one's on mobile, one's on PC, whatever it is, and it's getting hard to learn from each other in a context where everyone's doing something completely different. But it serves a certain need, but it's related in that it's people come together who were doing game stuff. Jams, pretty obviously, are, people get together 48, 24 hours, whatever. They build games together as a one-time thing on ad hoc teams. And this is kind of more the atmosphere and attitude of these clubs or these meetups that make games, in that the focus is less about producing some commercial product like a company might, but it is kind of lighthearted. We're doing some experimental stuff, because there's no money involved in it. It's just kind of mess around, try some things, learn some things. And one of the nice things about jams, right, is that they're extremely accessible. People can kind of walk in there knowing nothing. It's like, if you have a test on Monday, you know that at least by Tuesday the stress is over. The nice thing about this is that close deadline means that somebody's going to try it and they don't feel overwhelmed because they know the storm's going to pass. Other experienced people are going to fill in for them. And there's usually a team element. There's solo jams, but there's often a team element. Artist collectives. There are many. Every one of their structures is different and their names are different and so on, but they predominantly are fairly exclusive groups. They tend to be they're both curated in their membership and curated in the projects, where each thing they do is often kind of cutting edge or trying to change something or question things. And that's a great place for extremely experienced people. It is also extremely inaccessible or difficult for beginners to even ask the question how to be involved in that. Because what tends to happen is those people kind of came up together. They used to be in experience together. They still knew each other 12 years into their industry or whatever. And then last is school studio labs. So increasingly the format that school classes have taken in games programs is that they will basically say, okay, you know what, there's a lot of really up-to-date, high-quality tutorials on YouTube, lynda.com, Udemy, Udacity, whatever. So instead of actually covering the mechanics in the class on like basics of programming or using Unity, whatever, is they'll say, okay, everybody, your Unity project is due at the end of October. Make teams, go do it. If you have questions, I'm here to consult with. But frankly, you're going to teach yourself off the internet, even if they cover it in class. You're not really going to pay attention because you're going to go back to your room and like learn that way anyway. And that also is like part of what allows these clubs to exist is the sheer quality of material that's now out there that like no one has to necessarily be taught from a teacher or a lecturer or whatever. For the most part, they can figure out. They may still have questions. That's part of where, as an organizer of the groups, you can still be kind of a lightning rod for questions, tell people through troubles they're having. But that tends to be another part we can kind of borrow. And the usual kind of challenges too for this, obviously, depending where you're based in the United States, schools are enormously expensive. Even in Europe, even if they are paid for by the government or supported or otherwise a little more accessible, there's people who are in a certain phase of their life where that's easier for them to do. And for adults in certain other phases of their life, if they have a family, a full-time job, etc., these can suddenly be just very inaccessible, very just kind of out of the question, as much as like maybe school sports might have filled a certain role in our life that they could benefit from. And so that's another kind of thing we can kind of compare, contrast to what we're doing. In terms of the actual format that these take, it is a bit of a blend, and I guess I will mark this away. But, so, one of the things important to notice about how these sort of meetups work is that the games are not made at the meetups. So it's not like a game jam where people go and they make games together at the same time. The meetings have a few things that happen at the meetings. We have weekly meetings. This has been the format now for all three groups. I interviewed about a dozen other clubs to get sort of comparable notes. And what we tend to find is that if they meet less than once a week, things kind of fall off the rails. It's very, very easy if you don't have a habit of like every Thursday, every Sunday, whatever it is for each person, to just like slip their mind. As soon as it's gone for 2 weeks, it's kind of gone forever. But at those weekly meetings, the main thing we're doing is project updates. And that is each project lead is just showing and demonstrating their project. And they're saying, here's the current version of our game, here's the newest stuff, we have a model from Tim, we have this new functionality Jeremy added. And it's a chance to showcase and call attention to highlight to everyone's contributions. It's also, as part of those updates, a chance to ask for help to the rest of the group of like, we could really use another texture artist, or okay, time's running out on our deadline, we still don't have music, if someone wants help with music, which is kind of the thing we're thinking. But that's another sort of part of what project updates are all about. This is also when we fit in pitches. And so any project that's going to get made gets a pitch. Different groups have had different attitudes about the lax or seriousness of a pitch. I tend to prefer to vet my pitch people because I have the concern of if someone's working alone, they bite off more than they can chew. That's their own lesson to learn. If they do it in a group setting, it can take 8 people with them who made contributions, who never saw their project come to fruition. It's extremely important to survival of these kind of meetups, organizations, collectives, that work that gets made gets used somewhere, gets released, because the worst thing happens to morale is someone makes something and then never materialized. And so that's a big part of ensuring that people who are pitching are kind of know what they're getting into. The other rule of thumb we have for this that I find is a really handy fallback is for someone to pitch a project, all I need to really see is some sort of demonstrable proof, could be they've done prototypes, they've made a game alone, whatever, that they could make the game that they're pitching really badly alone in the time frame that they're asking for. So if they're asking like a 2-month project, if they're asking for a 5-month project, whatever, I need to just have a reasonable guess or sense that like, okay, well, working alone, they could kind of make something crudely like this. It might have terrible art, the level design might be bad, the functionality might be kind of hackish, might be kind of buggy, but they could do it at all. Because then what that allows to happen is anything that they might have done badly on a solo project, someone else in the club can then step in to do a nicer version of it. They can, replace the placeholder level with like actually paying attention to the level design process, and someone else who might have just like on their own project done terrible art, there's this nice side effect where someone who, even if they're not like an artist or a musician or whatever, if they're focusing all their mental energy, attention, and learning time on doing better tile art, level design, whatever, it comes out better. And it is oftentimes the case that in these groups we see a lot of people who their core skill sets, they identify either mainly as designers, mainly as programmers, in a few cases artists, but we see a lot of adaptation where in the context of this club, the pressure's so low, the projects are not commercial, they're not being sold, that it's a fair, free, easy chance for them to experiment a bit and try some roles that they're not usually strong in, that they're new to the tools. And especially too, I mean, like a game jam project, people will then design their aesthetics to be low poly, low pixel count, whatever, so it's accessible, and if someone wants to try something, they can do it. Another part about between the project updates and how projects are pitched and planned is an expectation that anyone who joins a project is on a completely tentative basis. There's no commitment. They're not signed up as, I am your artist, count on me for the next 5 months. It is extremely week by week. 1 week someone might do some levels for a game. They might kind of dabble and do some music for another game. They might kind of hop around doing code fixes. And it sounds like it would completely fall apart. It sounds pretty flimsy. Again, we've released over 200 games for this kind of format, and I think an important part of it is someone's way more likely to step into the role if they don't feel like they're signing away 5 months of their life, and instead can just think of it as like, well, you know, I could do a model in Blender. I could do one tile set. And then once they've done it, they figure out well, I can do my next one faster or easier. It's not so hard. I know more about the project. It's less intimidating for me to get into it. And I just find it's way more helpful to lower that barrier. Also because everyone doing this has real lives. And like I said, this is something that works much better for people who are adults. They have other obligations. And we have some people who are younger and students as well, but they also have other obligations in real life and sports and grades and whatever. And what this allows for it to happen is if they need to take a week or two off because real life is getting real, no one cares. No one feels any pressure about it. No one's mad about it. They said they do something they didn't. We very much focus on the project updates. No one's ever oh, we're behind schedule or Tim was supposed to do whatever. It's always just very positive focus on here's what we got this week. We're really grateful for all the cool stuff happening. It's coming together. And part of how these things happen, right, is so in planning out these projects to pitch them, so every single month, and this is kind of a 2 month, a 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 month, that's kind of our scale. We occasionally have a 1 month project, but we try to keep them 2 to 5. At the 1 month, it's much closer to kind of a game jam scope. Again, these all being part-time, moonlighting, few-hour-a-week kind of people. But if we look at each one of these as being, a 4-week month, 4 weeks month, just kind of cut them up. And so when they're planning out the project, there's basically coming up with, okay, well, if I only got one thing done each week, as a pretty low fair bar to set, what could we have done in a couple of months? And as the project lead, okay, well, so some core functionality. We always kind of write off the end week or two as being polishing, testing, bug fixing. It's usually accounting for other stuff that has shifted from just real life taking over, so we kind of write off those last 2 weeks in the schedule. And pretty quickly you kind of just look at well, okay, I mean, if there's a solid, even 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20, 25 evenings, whatever, just chucked at something, you wind up with a pretty substantial amount of work in a way that is also spread out across a much longer time than a game jam, which has this nice side effect of other things in life come to inspire us. We have some distance from it. We see some movies. We come back to it, play some other games, see something someone else's project, and just I think is this much kind of nicer thing than again in the case of a jam. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but we very much have to bubble our mind from reality, do just that for a long time until it's finished, and it had no chance to kind of cross-pollinate with the richer world around us and our social interactions or even playtesting outside of our group and so on. Another thing about how that works out in terms of the spreading out of it is that, again, any given week could be only one person chipping in, the project lead. They tend to have to lead by example. The expectation is the lead is doing most of the work. They're also the ones who kind of got to put the stake in the ground saying, here's the kind of game we're making. It's a battleship game or it's a puzzle game or whatever. And so part of what they are paying in a way to be able to do and say that is that they're kind of carrying the bulk of the weight. But they're trying to frankly create opportunities for others. Even though they put an additional plan in motion, the expectation is always that the project's going to change. That it's whoever's involved, they're not being paid. It's purely on what they feel like doing, what they want to practice. And so if the modeler wants to make medieval armor, then you're like, how do I work nights into this project? Or if you're a musician like really likes techno music, we're like, that's not what I had in mind, but how do we make that make sense here?
It could have cool effects.
Yeah, it could have cool effects, totally. Yeah, and so a lot of what the project lead also tries to do is tries to corral and be like, okay, well, here's what we have to work with, and here's the talent we have, and what they feel like doing. And it's totally the opposite of like a commercial environment where someone is like, pushing back on that's not the look we're going for. Or art director said otherwise. It's entirely oh cool, you brought this, you made this neat thing. How can I position this in a project? And part of what I love about these kind of games is that it allows people who all have different talents in music and art and whatever. And like, if a musician just puts music on SoundCloud, other musicians might listen to it. If an artist puts art on DeviantArt, other artists will look at it. Coder checks code into GitHub, other coders will look at it, but nobody else. But when you wedge all that stuff together into a game, it's suddenly very easy to get like other people in your family to look at it, other relatives and just friends and possibly HR people. This is also a structure that it's low cost enough in its operation by contrast to a university with its infrastructure and staff and faculty, whatever. It can have people coexisting. Some of them will do it purely for enrichment, some will do it purely for fun, in the same way as we dance and we paint and we skate and we do so many things. We sing, not with the expectation we're all going to have to do it professionally, but it's because we just want to do it. But if those people can coexist peacefully with others who are using this to build portfolio. And another way we guarantee that is we have extremely specific credits. And I'm going to go in specific credits, put this in a box. It's such an important point, and we sometimes fail at this, but we try not to. So in the case of, like, if you open Adobe Photoshop, there's a pile of names. And they specifically make it a pile of names because they don't want some other company to be able to look at Adobe Photoshop and be like, we need the one who wrote the shader. Yeah, that person. It's a big problem because, like, they get headhunted. We want our people headhunted. We want someone to look at it. And this is the case where, like, you show it to friends and family, they want to know, what part did you do? You show it to a recruiter, they want to know, okay, well, what part did you do? And so we try to make the credits very clear. We don't say, like, list of level design. We just say, like, this person designed level 1. This person designed levels 2 and 4.
This person made this barrel.
Yeah, this person made this barrel. Here's the art by, Sasha did the following things, or April did the following things. Very specifically, which characters, which items. And the other nice side effect of this is it also helps lower tension or pressure from, if the names are piled together, there can be this attitude of like, it's going to make me look bad if they're not all equally good, or it's going to reflect on me poorly. And it actually allows them to absolve themselves of responsibility, to be like, that clearly was not me. That was the model by our first-time modeler, such and such, without having to worry about that getting pinned on them. And so that's a lot of what we focus on is really low pressure, low key, because a lot of it gets people out of game development is when they feel too much pressure, they feel overwhelmed. So we try to create kind of a much more low pressure atmosphere, and so we're always pushing on that. We tend to be very forgiving if someone's like, I meant to do stuff, I had things come up. We try to be extremely understanding, like, okay, how do I just get you back up to speed? There's only one or two times where I really have to like kind of counter that and be like, you're kind of making excuses, and it's like, it's a bit like being a fitness coach of like trying to help, they're not meeting their goals, and you're trying to help them figure out, okay, well, what can we do differently here? How can we make your tasks smaller? How can we make something that's going to work for you to do it? And the other nice thing about this, because it's continuously pitching in project updates, so in the college clubs, that was the GameDev and the Carnegie Mellon Game Creation Society, those would do projects by semester, so every semester a new project would pitch, they would work on it within the semester. Now that our Los Angeles group, which is now an online club, does it year-round, pitches are just staggered. All the projects are staggered. Some projects are finishing at a given time, some projects are starting. Right now we have finished 21 games, 6 are currently active. Another one's pitching today in like 6 hours. And those are, because they're constantly starting and finishing, it gets developers to think not in terms of, this is the one game I'm ever going to make. I have so much pressure to see my personal vision come to life. Otherwise, I'm going to be judged poorly by it or whatever. There's multiple projects they can kind of dip their toes in. There's always new stuff coming up. And it gets them to think longer term about, this is not the game I'm making. This is one of many games building in some direction of learning skills to maybe realize a different vision that they have. Maybe they want to pitch later. We're proud. I think at this point, a third of our members who are active have pitched and led projects. It's not something like a workplace where you get this like management hierarchy of they have worked their way up in the years. And this is something that in my brief time in AAA surprised me. Like some of the lead game designers were like exhausted and kind of like, frankly, didn't necessarily want to keep doing that.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like too late. Like that was where they were at financially and professionally. And they couldn't just grab the junior person and just have them jump in their seat. And so like they're kind of stuck, but like here it's extremely normal that someone will lead a project and then like slip under the radar for a bit and just do some little fiddling and help people tie some bows around things. And it's just this really nice, much flatter atmosphere. The leads aren't even like ahead of anybody else. They're part of the team, and everybody else, everybody's just trying to make stuff. A lot of our most active contributors are leading some other game at the same time, and they're like, but I need to get my head out of World War II for a little bit and think about puzzles, or I need to stop thinking about whatever, and it's just a much nicer environment for that kind of stuff. Got our weekly meetings, got our pitching. The pitch just basically begins, sort of basic format for the pitching. Oh, actually, there's one other thing that happens in the club meetings, which I will mention before I talk about pitching, which is guest speakers. And that's something that, like, it's a natural, easy draw as to, like, people who are in this group care to hear it. And the nice thing is that technology now is to a point where, like, you don't need to fly anybody in. You don't need to pay anybody to show up. If you have... Yeah, Skype. No, literally, like, if you have local people, great. I've Skyped in to guest speak at a lot of different places, a lot of, like, all over the world. We've got guest speakers who join us. We do video meetings now for our club, and they'll just join us in from wherever they're at. It's like an hour of their time. Most game designers are super eager to talk to others to help pass on their things to, well, like part of my mission is help them avoid mistakes they made. And that's something that, like, at something like here at IndieCade, something like any conference, anywhere, any school, it's really, really easy to get their ear and be like, hey, would you talk to my club on Skype for an hour? And they're like, obviously, yes, I will. And that's not something where for like a Skype hour, someone's usually expecting an honorarium or a lot of money or travel costs, whatever. But you can get a lot of people, even just emailing them, hitting them up on Twitter, etc. These people out there, we actually, on our club page, which is gamkedo.club, you can see a like grid of the 20 some odd guest speakers we've had in our first year. I can already say, like, obviously any of those people like to remote guest speak. You can kind of email any of them. If you have a hard time getting in touch with them, let me know, and I will get in touch with them. But, like, these people are great. They're easy to hold of, and it adds value to people in the club. We've had a couple cases where we had, what was it? So, like, one of our games was finishing, and it was some robots destroying buildings in space or whatever. And we had Mark Diaz of the Doom 2016 project to speak for our club. He was talking about screen shake and all these other things, and so we're like, we'll add screen shake to our robots destroying buildings game. It looked much better, but it was inspired by that like simple point during his conversation. And it's also, I think it's healthy too, because it allows them to kind of compare and contrast and look at sometimes, okay, well, how is what we're doing different from what's going on in industry? Because obviously they're not the same. There's a scale of magnitude of the 40, 68 hour work week as compared to like one evening a week kind of attitude. And for some people, they look at it and they decide, like, that's fine, that's cool, I'm going to keep my day job, making more money, doing something else, more stable line of work, whatever, but they still have an outlet in their life to make games they feel like making without being stressed about, is this making money, is this whatever. But so the pitch format tends to be, first off, obviously there's like game, title, name, the speaker. They tend to then have like a relevant background slide. And this sounds like a simple thing, or you might think they would know each other already from the club, but oftentimes they're also focused on their own tasks that they don't notice. But this is their chance to call attention to, like, I did some tile art for this game, I did some music for that game, I was maybe pulled some last minute bug fixing for this other one, which might not have been very visible. And that's really great because it helps other people in the club picture for themselves, well, now I'm doing those smaller things, and as I do them, I can see how when I start to build maybe 3 or 4 of those kind of things together, I'm kind of as prepared as this project lead and may as well lead a project too, and it helps it look much more accessible and be much more accessible than the assumption that they came into it with a decade of doing this, or that they already learned this stuff, or they went to school for it, whatever. Because in many cases, we have people jump in, and like, frankly, this is kind of the first time they're doing some of this stuff, but after a few, they're kind of like, I get it, I can kind of keep these balls in the air. After that, we tend to do sort of just like a kind of the high level, and this is like a one slide kind of pitch. It's closer to an elevator type thing. Oftentimes this is like when we might show a screenshot of 1 or 2 other games and be like, it's cool, kind of like MechWarrior, kind of like this other thing, or the certain look, the other thing. There's always the clear notion here that we're not making any of these giant AAA games that people know, or even the level of polish of indie games you might reference, but it is just a common vocabulary thing. If you can save 1 million words, it's like pictures are worth 1,000 words. Video games are worth a lot more in terms of like, it's going to try to feel like this. And so another example, we had a guy led a game that was like a flight simulator. He was talking about like these PC games in the 90s he really liked that just aren't really made anymore, but like he wants to make something that feels like that, and he's made a point of like you're shooting the machine guns only, so it's always dogfighting, no missiles. Missiles make it too easy when you just click the button. And so like he had kind of an idea, and already people in the group know, okay, well here's the kind of project I'm getting involved with, here's the kind of vision he's shooting for, and again, even if it might adapt, this avoids the problem that we had in university studio lab environments, was, so we've had a classroom of people, and they divide us into teams of 5, and they consciously say, okay, each team's gonna have a designer, and an artist, and a programmer, and whatever, or at least one producer, and then they figure out what game to make. And the problem was they all went into the team with completely different hopes and interests as to like, one person wants to make adventure, one person wants to make a shooter, one person wants to make a puzzle game, whatever. And then like inevitably most of them are frustrated. And in this environment, like anyone who gets involved kind of like knows what bus they're getting on. Like I like isometric adventure games, or I like clicking puzzle games, or whatever it is. It just ensures that they're on it because they're sharing that vision they're kind of pushing towards. Like I say, with the idea that whoever's doing whatever will have choice over how it works. The person writing the AI decides how the AI works. The person who's just writing the code decides how the code's formatted. There's never any direction over like, I need you to go do this. The only exception that does come in, we'll get to kind of further down the list in a little bit, but there are people who prefer direction. There's people who like actually feel better with like, just tell me what to model, I'll throw a model over the wall, I'll call it a day, check my box, and like some people prefer that. You feel that out as project leads. Part of what I love about the club is it's practice as much as anything for leadership of just like programming and design and art and whatever. People who otherwise would not be at a level yet in their careers to have management experience are getting practice leading a vision that they're directing and trying to tie people's work together. But so this high-level pitch is really just trying to like, okay, first off, just trying to say like, what the heck are we doing? This might be game references more than anything, screenshots, whatever. Then there is maybe like might talk about like some kind of key feature or differentiator, feature or change or like twist or whatever. What's kind of trying to make this their thing? It's like we had someone who pitched a match 3 game, and we try to allow a full range. We have very complicated stuff, very simple stuff. At any given time, it's important people to be able to get their hooks in different places. But like in that case, it was like, but it's like WikiLeaks themed. It's like NSA themed. You're like hacking, and so like that helps inspire a certain idea about the novelty or the look or the story elements or whatever. After this, we tend to show a demo of the prototype. And so effectively, where this kind of intersects with game jam culture is that before they're pitching, in most cases, they try to have something really rough, playable demo, which helps show anyone in the group pretty quickly, like, okay, well, they have the basics, we have something to build upon. Helps answer a lot of questions really quickly about, like, what's the camera angle, what's the perspective, are they using, like, what kind of control input, whatever. Demo is pretty important just to, like, show them once again, like, here is the game and what it is. Followed by, we then pretty quickly go into schedule. And this is something, even if we show the weekly schedule on the slides, we obviously don't read through all of it, but it's kind of help people see, okay, well, is this a 1 week game, or 1 month game is the shortest we do? Is this a 5 month game being the longest, and anything between? Then we have roles. And this is purely like wanted. This is not a needed. Once again, the project leads expected that if it came down to it, they could kind of collaborate together badly. But the roles wanted, we try to emphasize that just like our credits, they should be extremely specific. It's no good if every game that pitches is like, we need sound people, level designers, artists, and programmers, because of course they do. But if they'll say like, we need explosion sound effects and laser sound effects, we're looking for people who want to design rooms that look kind of like classic ancient Roman architecture with columns, or if they say that we want music that's kind of, pumpy and energetic, people can better picture that and hear that how it relates to them. And as much as like, if there's a group that's very specific, it's easier to kind of find our way to like, that's the place for me. The roles is really kind of trying to get people's ears to perk up as to like, that's something I could do. I can see myself doing that. That's something I'd like to get practice doing. Or like, that doesn't sound too hard. The other challenge in this, and we always find this back and forth in projects too, is that it alternates between there's people who they're looking for the easiest thing where they feel like they're comfortable with it. But of course, the other challenge, it has to be inspiring enough of a challenge. So you can't just give nothing out for the easiest of tasks. It's occasionally totally worthwhile to set aside, like, we're going to try to procedurally generate some levels or whatever, knowing that, like, maybe no one will do it and we have a fallback plan, but if someone wants to take that on as a stretch goal, we'd love to do that. We can make it make sense in this project, etc. And then we have a spot for questions. As part of that, or right before we do that, we tend to also just do kind of an informal show of hands and just like a waggle of like who might be interested in doing this and being involved. No one's held accountable for that. It's just like this opportunity for them to like think once again of like, I should talk to this person afterwards. I should chime in on the Slack forum we use for our communications, whatever. And also it's reassuring to the speaker of like, did I get through to them? And usually it's just the virtue of other faces looking at them, like some people will be kind of like, yeah, I could probably help out a little bit. Not all of them wind up openly holding it out, obviously, but like it's kind of part of the gist of how that works. The deadlines are fixed. When a project is pitched, if we say we're releasing on like December 10th or October 13th or whatever, we hold to it. And I think that this is part of the major educated value. It's part of what allows it to work. That like once again we've got like, okay, this is launched no matter what. That's when the game comes out. And like, we're humans, so like if someone has like a family emergency, we're like, obviously we stick it back a week, it's no big deal, whatever. But like otherwise, like we do not extend it for more features. We don't extend it for whatever. So as they approach, they have to start kind of winnowing down their plans and shrinking and cutting in the details into like, we gotta get things ready to release. This is when it goes online. Now that said, even though it's when it goes online, whatever shape it's in, and again, we're not trying to be rude to anybody, but it is like, we all know that's what we're aiming towards. Once it goes online, they can still release updates anytime they feel like. They can just overwrite the file, they can fix some stuff, they catch some bugs, they can adjust the difficulty, no big deal. We've had cases where people add some like non-trivial polish after release. We try to encourage that next time they should think about that as part of their pre-launch plan. It's always hard, and industry struggles with this as much as like practice developers do. But it is this thing of like becoming increasingly aware of like, wow, I spent 2 more months fiddling on that than I thought I would. The game was still launched when we said it would. We still hit the deadline. The game was still out. It actually, I think, maybe forces an extra level of polished thinking when the core mechanics had to be in a certain shape by a certain date regardless. And it also means that for the team members who were involved in it, they know when they're basically free, when they're cut loose. Because the other thing that's terrifying, even though they're not really signing up for team, they also know that once they've contributed, they're going to feel a little bit more pressure to keep contributing, or like the lead might call them and be like, hey, could you do another whatever because you're real good at it? But they know that like, here's where, at latest, I can go on with my life and whatever. And so it's the same reason why at the college clubs, the GameDev and the Game Creation Society, all projects stopped before a semester switch. We never had anything go over a semester because people's lives changed. Classes changed, people would move, people would graduate, whatever. And we could not expect them to be on the hook thereafter. And this likewise, when anything they sign up on, they can know, like, here's the window of when that's going to stop applying to me. This is also the sort of thing, right, that led to on our club site, we have our list of 21 games from GameDev Club, or the 200 games spread between the other total clubs in general, of just finished projects that look really good to people who are having interviews or talking to recruiters, applying for stuff. That they're longer projects than a game jam is often also meaningful in those kind of contexts, where they're so used to hearing that, like, oh, I did some fiddling on a weekend and some whatever. I'm like, yeah, I need to know if you can, like, stick with a project longer. One of the weird side effects of this club structure, so again, that first one was established processes for in 2004. I didn't actually start the organization. I just set the processes in place. No games were being made before that, and now they were getting made. But this is pre-game jams, like, really taking off. Like, there were game jams in 2001, but they were kind of a very different nature, much smaller in scale. This is also pre-iOS market, pre-Xbox Live Arcade, pre-Steam in the modern sense, pre-indie games in general, which kind of blew up in 07, 08, 09. And what this meant was, when we were first doing these, people were really impressed we made a game in only 6 months. It was like really weird to them that we pulled off a game in mere 4 or 5 or 6 months on like a team of only 5 or 6 students or whatever. Obviously, even as late as like the middle club, which I started in 2010, by that point, people were surprised we could stick to the same game idea for 6 whole months without getting really impatient and restless and just trying to do all the other stuff. Some of which we have the outlet of these other projects in parallel we can kind of dabble in. But like, it is increasingly now a respectable career skill to show like I can keep my attention on a thing longer and see it through and do something slightly more ambitious than I would have done in 24, 48 hacking hours or whatever. It enforces a little bit more discipline, not a lot, on making sure they can write code they can read a week later or 2 weeks later. It's still not software architecture, but it's a little bit more like they know that in 3 months they're going to be looking at the same thing. It's going to be their problem to fix. And or they learn from their own experience of like, they've written the stuff, they've had the problem going over it because there's more projects constantly rolling. They go back in, they try again, they learn from experience in that way. Speaking of interviews, so the other ways that these things have been super practically beneficial, and again, that not everyone's goal is to get a job out of it or do it professionally, but for some it is. So they tend to pay off for people they show up really well in interviews talking about that they're involved in these kind of meetups making games, clubs making games. Even when they're not applying to game jobs, it's just more interesting that like, oh my god, you do this, and like you're making games, and like you've worked on how many of them, and how many different roles, and like you've led a couple, and like all that sounds pretty impressive, and they can point at the game. It's not one of these ethereal things like, I guess it's cool you play saxophone, but like, I can't hear that. They can go to the internet and see, like, there's your name on this thing and the roles you did very specifically, and like that comes across well. We've had a case where we've had someone who she was interviewing for positions at GDC, and she was interested in like narrative track, which is an extremely difficult kind of role to get. I will say up front, she did not get the role from this interview. But even the confidence going into that interview with like, I don't have to talk about it from, I've written a script, look at my script, but she's worked on narrative in a released game where like we had voice acting and we had the scenes and we had puzzles and there was a visual aesthetic we stuck to for the whole game, is a different way to engage in that conversation for an interview than once again of like, hey, I've done some writing, I really hope you'll give me a shot. It can be like, I've done writing on a small game, I know it's not the same thing y'all are doing, but like, what are my steps next to get there? And it's just some better push in that direction. We've got a case where people have gone on to kickstart teams together. Elsinore, one of the games that's at IndieCade, is actually a bunch of people from my first club, Game Creation Society. It's like a Shakespearean type Hamlet game, isometric, and but they kickstarted the game successfully. It's Gold English Studios, and those people met each other through the club. And it's so much different to network in the context of like, we built games together. I know that Connor delivered his work on time, or Katie was like really good at working with our team, or there's no hypotheticals of like, oh, I'm taking a shot on everybody. They've literally done the work and seen they can do the work, and then know that, well, if we just had some financial backing to support more of our time and energy doing this, we can do that. And then plus, as part of their potential making that case to possible backers, once again, like we've been making games, look at the games we've been making, is a very different conversation than, I promise if you give us $100,000 or whatever, we'll do something with it. This is a much harder talk. Professional networking in general. This is something where my sound guy for Battleship 88, this is now 2005, I guess, but a full sales student, he just wanted to put his sound in games. He'd only done sound not in games, in film and animation, whatever, as a student. And so he was one of our first long distance kind of cases in these clubs. And we did a Battleship game to specifically like show off his cool sound effects of like there's splashing and there's cannons and explosions and whatever. Came out super great. And then in the future, when I was like a professional iPhone developer, I needed a sound effects person, I was like, I'm going to contact that guy who just killed it. When as a student, he like completely delivered, completely knew how to do the stuff. And like I say, a lot of those artist collectives, etc., are people who come up together. This is very much something like we have now an alumni network of people from the first club who like, one's a Bungie designer in combat. We've got people who, one of them worked on Journey as a field engineer. These people have gone on to good places. Now, I'll also be totally upfront, part of that's also definitely the Carnegie Mellon computer science degree or Georgia Tech credentials, whatever. But like as far as what helped get them to those directions, they'll all speak to how the club was a part of that picture for them. And then additionally, that again, admit that we're all in the same network together still, of like we've worked together on games going a long way back. And that's just sort of these nice other indirect ways. The other aspect is that if someone wants to, it can be a proof of traction experiment. So one of the important things about how our clubs work is that we don't claim ownership over anybody's stuff. It's not like when you work at a company and you're signing over the rights and the copyright and the whatever for them to own it and manipulate and do what they want with it. We do ask two slight exceptions, and those are that if once they put their work in a club project, they're okay with it. This is an informal agreement. They're not signing anything, but it's part of the membership agreement. They've read it and they've agreed to it. They'll let it stay in that game. They won't come back at us later and be like, take that game down. I'm ashamed of what my art looked like 6 years ago. And because that would spoil everyone else's portfolios, it would really screw things up for the club. So we just asked them, like, could you just leave it and just be cool? And everyone is. It's like game jams. Like, no one really, we're going out of our way to make sure we're really clear, like, that's the expectation. And then secondly, that work and depictions of it, both the game downloads or screenshots or videos, can be used on peer portfolios and in the club website for recruitment, promotion, and that kind of thing. Because once again, like that ultimately helps the whole rest of the club, where they can just keep hanging out, making stuff, knowing that someone else is looking out for, bringing in new, cool other people to help being involved, help keep doing stuff. But the proof of traction, what that comes down to is because we don't own their stuff, they can leave the free version out and then go like make a more commercial version with more time. This is the same model that, I don't know why I put a mark, but so like VisionMark Proxy 2nd edition. So VisionMark Proxy didn't come from one of our clubs. It came from a couple of our club members who were in Georgia Tech. They'd done a class where they made a game together, and that game was like an alien who steals eyeballs to see the world differently and solve puzzles. And it's this really neat idea. And that game got them to up to the level of showing at IndieCade's booth at E3, which they were all quite pleased with. Didn't go on to be a finalist or other stuff. They got them there, but that was enough traction for them to then recruit some other people to be involved. That's when I got involved with the project. Completely rewrote the engine. We brought in some other artists to completely redo the art and the look, redesigned all the levels and stuff. That game got played 7 million times worldwide. that wasn't enough traction proof to double the team size for a sequel. Missed Vision by Proxy, we had twice as many eyes to steal, way more levels and so on, more artists involved, more looks. And at that point, we were being approached by businesses to possibly license the game, to get paid to port it to iPad or otherwise. And those are things that would not have happened except that it was first in that safe context, that it's a classroom, you take chances to experiment. So it's a case where in the club, they can make a game, and if that game goes on, we've had club games from GameDev get played 300,000 times, 400,000 times on online sites and whatever. It can be evidence of maybe we would want to take that and run with it and do some more stuff. At that point too, of course, it would be between them and the other members, much like when students make projects together, as to okay, well, are we buying out your assets? Are you going to join the team? Are we replacing the assets? Whatever. But it becomes a discussion between people who are collaborating on that project to go do whatever the heck they feel like with it. And the club is super happy to any way it can support that, because we would love to point at those examples and be like, look at this cool thing that was born here. And it's also the kind of thing that can help leverage their case for whether it was a Kickstarter or whether it was trying to reach press, to be able to say our free version of the game we made on our nights and weekends in this club or this meetup or whatever format we use was able to get X amount of attention, or played especially a lot in Battleship 8 was played a lot in Czech Republic and Brazil for reasons I've still never made sense out of. But you can get that data from digital stuff. You put analytics in their things, and that's just a neat little extra piece that you can do safely in this context where you're not spending money on assets, you're not paying yet to do commercial quality of stuff. And increasingly, this I think is one of the ways that we avoid this problem of when people will quit the day job, spend their life savings for a year or 2 or 3 on a project before they find out, does the world care? This helps push a level at which we know it's not professional quality yet. We're just trying to figure out, is anyone interested in the mechanics and what this is, before we then think about reinvesting more energy and effort into it. And if they do, then they already have a network of other people that they can possibly work with, that they worked with before, and they might even invite some new people to the team, but they can all sort that out. And so we've also had people in the club who've gotten their first professional music work, first professional game programming work, first professional whatever type of game work thereafter, artists and so on, do this sort of thing first through proof of traction, as well as, speaking of artists and so on, portfolio. So this is especially a case where in the asset realm, content realm, right? So musicians, 3D artists, etc. This environment is not able to make things like Mass Effect or really high-end stuff, but it does have the flexibility for them to show off whatever they can do well. And so part of where that sci-fi aliens documentary building game came from was we had this remarkably talented artist, Angelo. He had professionally been trained in 3D modeling and animation and so on, and he really liked modeling robots. So we're all right, let's design an entire game around this cool robot he can make. And then he just kept adding more models and more animations and stuff, all of which then became pieces that we added to a video portfolio we helped him cut together, showing off not only here's all his cool pieces he did in school, here's all his cool different other kinds of work and technique, but also here's some of his work in games, live, shooting machine gun bullets and the camera spinning around it and animated and stuff happening all around it. And I think it helps show a situation in context where he was able to accommodate for poly count, he was able to generate the material output we needed to be able to import into Unity. He'd worked with programmers to figure out why this model won't work and where it did or didn't need joints and things that before just hadn't been a problem to think about, but he's now passed that hurdle, and it's one more thing equipping him, which helped him connect to some possible contract opportunities to be able to do this stuff. And again, that helped separate. He already had the skill, but he hadn't shown the skill applied to games, and that's where he wanted to do it. Same thing with the musicians we had who got music work, was he had done plenty of great music, but had never done game music. And then in the club, immediately he was able to okay, well look, I'm doing looping tracks, they're based on the atmosphere of the scene, the lighting or whatever. In some cases, it's a chance to kind of fiddle with Fmod in a setting that's less intimidating than the commercial context where if you screw it up, you've got some sort of setback or problem. But that's also been an important part of where this has been beneficial for folks, has been building portfolio, and so on. Now, the last thing I want to make sure I talk about is how the hell do you start this? Because it seems it's great when this exists. And also I want to emphasize, obviously the point of the talk isn't don't join my group, go start a competing thing. They're all going to have different benefits regionally as to even though we have people everywhere, I would actually kind of prefer if someone was hey, I want to join your club, and I go, oh, you could join the European group. They are more your time zone. You can go hang out together. Right now, we're really grateful for the Europeans that we have. But I also appreciate the LA group. We can go get tacos together. We go play board games together. There's some benefit to local region. Also, we use HTML5 Canvas and JavaScript. We use Unity. Nothing wrong with other tools. But when people all stick to the same tools as a community, they can learn from each other. They can get depth of practice. They can look back at past example code in a way you can't if you have one team on Unreal, one team in GameMaker, one team in Construct, whatever. Nothing wrong with those tools. But ideally, if someone comes to me wanting to do that, I'd like to be able to send them to like, go talk to Jennifer, she runs the Unreal version of this kind of stuff. Or, oh, Game Maker, Tim is really good with that stuff. Go to join Tim's group. But in starting this stuff out, 3 things to consider. One is like money. That's a thing. I think there's often a temptation to want to do these things completely for free, like oftentimes game jams, etc. try to do. As game jams have also figured out, oftentimes logistically there is benefit and sustainability, and if there is some sort of financial incentive, also it's for participation where people are paying for it. People are much more likely to go to a gym they're paying for than one that's just open. People are more likely to a library where it's free, which is a shame, but reality. And so that's also the real thing of like, we have dues that are on par with karate clubs, with fitness gyms, or whatever, which also means we can like translate into services where like we can support them. I provide office hours as an extension of my personal training. Also, it's more sustainable this way in that the groups that are totally free are always at the mercy of some other place, letting them use their space after hours or whatever. If you have any money to go around, you can probably reasonably afford to rent a space if you're a local group to like always have the same parking, same location, same time. You don't have this nightmare of, well, sometimes it's Thursdays, sometimes it's across town, sometimes it's far for some people, and you start having people drop off just so they can't consistently be there because they have other stuff they can't plan around it, but I should plan around it. So that's a part of it. Now, when thinking about that number, if you do, again, it's important to not write off, like, not only, it doesn't have to be your full-time job, no one's going to get super rich doing this, this is not like making the $1 million selling indie game, but this is like, okay, well, can this sustain longer than I am? Like, if I move on with my life, is there enough money to go around that someone else in multiple officer roles? So like in the college clubs, we had like the meeting runner, we had a treasurer after there was some dues, modest. We had the project vetting person, who also is the person, I think is really important, also the one whose job it is to fill in gaps for if stuff's not getting done. That means that when they sign off on a project, they're also signing off on like, I trust this person enough that I'll pick up the slack if they don't do it. So that's the project vetting or the creative kind of like officer. And then we also have like a PR marketing person to like help try to do with recruitment and bringing in guest speakers, whatever. But it's to think about, okay, well, if money and a certain number of speakers, could I like part-time, a few hours a week, be paying people to carry this machinery on? Because it'd be nice to outlast us. It'd be nice to be sustainable for the members to count on it and not just be on the whim of like, I feel like doing this right now, but maybe in a couple years I might not. It shouldn't die at that point. But then when thinking about that, so the next thing we do is set up a landing page with a video. Landing page, video, and the video is literally like a 3-minute thing of like, hey, I'm Chris, here's my vision for the club, we're going to try to start in Los Angeles, here's the kind of stuff we're doing, the video's still on YouTube if you care to see it. If you're interested, join our free MailChimp mailing list, which as soon as it reaches a certain number of people, I'll send out a message with a survey about what part of town are you in, what kind of games do you care about, and try to go from there about like, okay, well, it looked like Thursday nights kind of worked for most of the people, we did a win to meet, whatever. But like a free mailing list, free video hosting courtesy of YouTube, just like a little recruitment bit. And what's nice about this is like you can plant this seed tonight. Like again, it's like 3 minutes and like a free account and like I guess $12 registration for a website or whatever with a domain. To then just get people to start putting their names on a list. And you can kind of ignore that list, and it can just sit in the background. You can occasionally tweet about it, put it on Facebook, let people know in the area, and like whatever. If it takes a while, whatever. If it's like 80 people soon, cool. If it's like takes a long time, no big deal. If it's only 12, but they really care, even better, whatever. But it's a chance to not feel like this. The normal challenge we have, right, is like, well, I don't want to like rent a space and spend this money and take this risk that no one's going to show up, and then I'm on the hook and I'm going to the negative, whatever. There's zero reason for that. It's like kind of like the idea of Kickstarter too, right? It's to like you put up the money before you have the thing. You're kind of figuring out, okay, well, who's into this? And then also allow me to then survey our list and be like, okay, well, some local game companies in LA are willing to host us, but do we want to be seen as the group that's like needing act giant company X, Y, or Z, or kind of do our own thing? And this enabled us to do our own thing. But that was really all we had besides that, and then figuring out what were the deals we're having. The other thing, of course, is like naturally, whatever number of people we have sign up, you can't expect all of them to show up. You kind of, it's like planning for a wedding, right? That you invite X number, some percentage that'll show up, some percentage will stick around. But our critical threshold in all 3 clubs was about 16 to 20 people. Once we had that, it was enough to kind of get going. We had a few projects in parallel, and we could just kind of keep rolling from there. And it's kept us, all 3 of these clubs now still going now, respectively, 12 years later, 6 years later, and a year later. So it's something I really like to say. I'd like to see more people doing. I'd like to see more people doing their versions of. It's a little bit of a weird thing still, where like people know what meetups are, they know what game jams are, they know what all this other stuff is. And I think increasingly, it's also, we think of it kind of like a health center, karate dojo, where it's something where someone may not be ready to invest university level expense into something, but they still want to do it, and it gives them an environment to try it. Some of whom, so one of our members made 2 or 3 really cool games at our club, and then went to game school with that as part of his portfolio, having known he tried it, he liked it, he knows what he get himself into, and plus he had the guest speakers to kind of set him up conceptually with some groundwork, as opposed to going cold turkey into what am I doing in my life? I guess this, and then hoping for the best. It's kind of an easier round for that too. Tweet me, and yeah. Speaking of which, I'm at GamKeto, and I am super active on Twitter. I check it every single day, tweet multiple times a day, do a lot of community retweeting. So I'll often post out a question and then retweet people's replies and stuff. Recently I just did a roll call of game developers, what do you do? And then so part of it, every format is going to be different. And that's part of the idea too, whatever you say in your video, you can decide, it's up to you what time frame you want to do things in, what platforms you want to focus in, what approach is appropriate for what you want, and you're going to attract or retain a certain kind of people based on what flag you sit in the ground and say, here's what we do. And when you do, tell me, and then when I have people who are better fit for what you're doing, I'll send them to you. Or if you have people in your region you're doing a local group, I'll send them over to your stuff. And that's totally how this hopefully can work, where, depending on what someone wants, there's some better fit for them, and ultimately everybody wins from that. I think a lot of the shredding and jadedness that we see from people who are experienced in the industry is they have all these ideas they want to do something with, but there's so many layers protecting them from doing some of their ideas, and this is totally a safe context, get it out of your system, try it, see where it goes,